It was one of the most important mornings of my life, but unfortunately, it started in the worst possible way. My alarm clock did not ring, and when I suddenly woke up and looked at the time, my heart nearly stopped. It was 8:15 a.m. My flight to Singapore was scheduled to depart at 9:30 a.m., and the airport was almost an hour away from my house. For a moment, I just stared at the clock in shock. Then, panic rushed through my body like electricity. "I'm late for my flight," I shouted. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the bathroom. Everything felt like it was moving too slowly. I brushed my teeth in less than a minute, quickly washed my face, and threw on the clothes I had prepared the night before. My suitcase was already packed, which saved me a little time, but time was still slipping away. At 8:22 a.m., I grabbed my suitcase and ran out of the house. I didn't even eat breakfast. My mother called from the kitchen. "Don't forget your passport." My heart skipped a beat. I quickly checked my bag. Thankfully, the passport was inside. I sighed with relief and ran outside to call a taxi. The road looked unusually busy that morning, which made my anxiety even worse. Finally, after what felt like forever, a yellow taxi stopped in front of me. "Airport, please, as fast as possible," I said breathlessly. The driver looked at the time and raised his eyebrows. "Your flight must be soon." "Yes," I replied nervously, "very soon." The taxi started moving quickly through the crowded streets. I kept looking at my watch every minute. The traffic lights felt like enemies, always turning red when we approached them. At one intersection, a long line of cars blocked the road. My heart pounded harder. "Please take another route," I begged. The driver nodded and turned into a smaller street. The road was narrow but less crowded. We moved faster, but my mind was still full of worry. What if I missed the flight? This trip was extremely important to me. I was traveling to attend an international conference where I would present my research. Missing the flight could ruin months of hard work. At 8:55 a.m., we finally arrived at the airport. I paid the driver quickly, grabbed my suitcase, and ran toward the entrance. Inside the terminal, everything seemed chaotic. People walking everywhere, announcements echoing through the speakers, and long lines at the check-in counters. I rushed to the airline counter. "My flight to Singapore. Please tell me it's not closed yet," I said, breathing heavily. The staff member checked the computer and looked at me. "You're lucky," she said with a small smile. "Check-in closes in 5 minutes." I almost collapsed with relief. She quickly checked my passport, printed my boarding pass, and tagged my luggage. I thanked her again and again before running toward the security checkpoint. Unfortunately, the line at security was very long. I looked at the clock again. 9:05 a.m. My hands started shaking. If I waited in that line, I might miss the flight. Gathering my courage, I walked to a security officer and explained my situation. "Sir, my flight leaves in less than 30 minutes. Is there any way I can go through faster?" The officer looked at my boarding pass and nodded kindly. "Follow me," he said. He guided me to a shorter line reserved for passengers with urgent departures. I thanked him sincerely. Within a few minutes, I passed through security and rushed toward my boarding gate. But the airport was huge. The gate number on my boarding pass was gate 42, which seemed to be at the far end of the terminal. I started running again, my suitcase wheels rattling loudly on the floor. Passengers looked at me with surprise as I rushed past them. Finally, I saw the sign, Gate 42. But my heart sunk when I noticed that the boarding line was almost finished. I ran to the counter and showed my boarding pass. The airline staff member scanned it and smiled. "You made it just in time," she said. I walked down the boarding bridge feeling exhausted but incredibly relieved. When I finally entered the airplane and sat in my seat, I took a deep breath. My shirt was slightly wet with sweat, and my legs felt tired from all the running. A few minutes later, the plane doors closed, and the aircraft slowly began moving toward the runway. I looked out the window and smiled. Despite all the chaos, the stress, and the fear, I had made it. As the plane lifted into the sky, I promised myself one very important thing. Next time, I would set 3 alarm clocks, because being late for a flight is an adventure I never want to experience again. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, my heart finally began to calm down. The stress and panic of the morning slowly faded away. I leaned back in my seat and looked around the cabin. Passengers were settling in, some were reading magazines, some were watching movies, and others were already sleeping. The flight attendants moved through the aisle with friendly smiles. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about everything that had happened that morning. If I had woken up 5 minutes later, I whispered to myself, I would have missed the flight. Suddenly, the woman sitting next to me spoke. "You look very tired," she said kindly. I smiled politely. "Yes, it has been a crazy morning." She laughed softly. "Late for the flight?" I was surprised. "How did you know?" She pointed at my slightly messy hair and my breathing that was still a little heavy. "I saw you running into the plane just before the doors closed," she said. We both laughed. Her name was Emily, and she was also traveling to Singapore for a business meeting. She was very friendly, and soon we began talking about our work, travel experiences, and favorite cities. Talking to her made the flight much more enjoyable. About an hour later, the flight attendant served lunch. I suddenly realized how hungry I was because I had skipped breakfast earlier. The meal tasted surprisingly good. While eating, I looked out the airplane window. The clouds looked like huge white mountains floating in the sky. The sun was shining brightly above them, creating a beautiful golden light. It was peaceful. But the calm moment didn't last long. About 30 minutes later, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are expecting some turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The airplane suddenly began shaking slightly. Emily looked a little nervous. "I don't like turbulence," she admitted. "Don't worry," I said, although I was also a little uncomfortable. The shaking became stronger for a few minutes. The plane moved up and down as if it were riding invisible waves in the sky. Some passengers looked worried, but the flight attendants remained calm. After about 10 minutes, the turbulence slowly stopped. The airplane became stable again. Everyone sighed with relief. Emily laughed nervously. "First, you almost miss your flight, and now this. Maybe this trip just wants to be exciting," I joked. A few hours later, the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing in Singapore in about 30 minutes. I felt excited again. This was my first time visiting Singapore, and I had heard so many wonderful things about the city, its beautiful skyline, clean streets, and delicious food. As the airplane began descending, I looked out the window again. The view was breathtaking. I could see the shining skyscrapers, the blue ocean, and ships floating peacefully in the harbor. The city looked modern and vibrant. Soon, the plane touched the runway smoothly. We had arrived. Passengers began clapping softly, which is a tradition on some flights. I smiled and gathered my belongings. Emily turned to me and said, "Good luck with your conference." "Thank you," I replied, "and thank you for the nice conversation." After leaving the plane, I walked through the airport feeling proud and relieved. The stressful morning was finally behind me. But I didn't know yet that my adventure in Singapore was only just beginning. After leaving the airplane, I followed the other passengers into the large and beautiful airport of Singapore. Everything looked clean, modern, and well organized. Bright lights shone from the ceiling, and large glass windows showed the busy runways outside. I felt excited and curious about the new country. Emily and I walked together toward immigration. Well, this is where we say goodbye, she said with a smile. Yes, I replied. It was really nice meeting you. Good luck with your conference, she said before walking toward another line. After immigration, I went to the baggage claim area. Many passengers were already standing near the long, moving conveyor belts, waiting for their luggage. I stood there patiently and watched the suitcases slowly come out. 1 suitcase, 2 suitcases, 10 suitcases, but mine did not appear. I waited for another 10 minutes. The crowd slowly became smaller as people collected their luggage and left the airport. Soon, the conveyor belt stopped moving. My suitcase was not there. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "Oh no, not again," I whispered. First, I was almost late for my flight, and now my luggage was missing. I walked to the airline help desk. "Excuse me," I said politely. "My suitcase did not arrive." The airline officer asked for my baggage tag and checked the computer. After a few seconds, she looked at me and said calmly, "Your luggage is still in transit." "In transit?" I asked nervously. "Yes, it seems your suitcase did not make it onto the plane in time because you checked in very late." I sighed deeply. Of course, because I was late for my flight in the morning, my suitcase had probably missed the loading process. "When will it arrive?" I asked. "Most likely on the next flight. We will deliver it to your hotel tonight." Although I was still worried, I felt a little relieved. I filled out a form with my hotel address and phone number. The airline staff promised that my luggage would arrive later that evening. Finally, I left the airport. Outside, the warm tropical air touched my face. Tall palm trees lined the road, and modern buildings shone under the afternoon sun. A taxi driver approached me. "Taxi, sir?" "Yes," I replied. "Please take me to Marina Bay." As the taxi drove through the city, I looked out the window with amazement. Singapore was even more beautiful than I had imagined. Tall skyscrapers touched the sky, green parks appeared between buildings, and the streets were incredibly clean. Soon we reached my hotel. After checking in, I went to my room and sat on the bed, feeling both tired and excited. What a day it had been! First, I woke up late. Then I rushed to the airport. Then I almost missed my flight. Then my suitcase disappeared. But despite all the problems, I had finally arrived in Singapore safely. I looked out of the hotel window at the shining city lights and smiled. Tomorrow would be the most important day of my trip, the conference presentation, and I hoped nothing else would go wrong. But deep inside, I had a strange feeling that another adventure was waiting for me in this incredible city. The next morning, I woke up very early. After the stressful journey of the previous day, I did not want to take any risks again. I checked the time carefully and prepared myself for the conference. The airline had delivered my suitcase late at night, so thankfully I had my formal clothes ready. I put on my suit, organized my presentation files, and looked at myself in the mirror. "Today is the big day," I said quietly. After eating breakfast at the hotel restaurant, I took a taxi to the conference center. The building was huge and modern, filled with people from different countries. Many professionals, researchers, and students had come to attend the international conference. Inside the hall, there were large screens, bright lights, and rows of chairs for the audience. My presentation was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. While waiting for my turn, I felt nervous. My hands were slightly shaking. This presentation was the result of many months of hard work, and I wanted everything to go perfectly. Finally, the host announced my name. Next, we invite our speaker to present his research. My heart beat faster as I walked toward the stage. For a moment, I remembered the previous morning, waking up late, running to the airport, and almost missing my flight. If I had missed that flight, I would not be standing here now. I took a deep breath and began my presentation. At first, I felt nervous, but after a few minutes, I became more confident. The audience listened carefully as I explained my ideas and showed the slides on the big screen. Some people nodded with interest, others took notes. When I finished speaking, the hall became quiet for a moment. Then the audience started clapping. A warm feeling filled my heart. All the stress and struggles of the journey suddenly felt worth it. After the presentation, several people came to talk with me. They asked questions about my research and shared their opinions. Some even suggested future collaborations. Later that afternoon, the conference organizers announced the Best Presentation Award. I sat quietly in my chair, not expecting anything. The host opened the envelope and said, "This year's Best Presentation Award goes to..." For a second, the room felt completely silent. Our speaker who traveled all the way here despite many challenges. Then he said my name. I was completely shocked. The audience applauded as I walked to the stage to receive the award. While holding the trophy, I smiled and remembered the chaotic morning before my flight. Sometimes life tests our patience with unexpected problems, but if we stay determined and keep moving forward, those challenges can lead us to success. That trip taught me an important lesson. Being late for my flight almost ruined everything, but in the end, it became the beginning of one of the most unforgettable experiences of my life.